The journey to Ravenshade began, as such journeys often do, in a place of warmth and light. The train from London was crowded with merchants, clerks, and families bound for the northern counties, and the smoke that billowed from its funnel trailed like a shroud across the wintry sky. I carried with me a satchel filled with legal documents, a change of clothing, and a mind still innocent of the darkness into which I was venturing. My employer had spoken of the case with little concern. "A simple matter, Mr. Harrell," he had said, tapping the stack of papers upon his desk. "An estate in the north, neglected these many years. You are to see that the will is duly executed, and the house's contents inventoried. A week at most, 2 at the outside." I accepted the charge eagerly, as any young solicitor might, never dreaming that those words would weigh upon me long after all others had faded. The landscape changed as the train carried me northward. The bustling towns and soot-stained chimneys gave way to open moors and bare fields, where sheep grazed among the withered grass and the wind howled ceaselessly. By the time I descended at the lonely station of Greymoor, the sun was already sinking behind the hills, painting the clouds a lurid red. A single cart awaited me, its horse stamping impatiently. The driver was a man of few words, his face roughened by years of salt and wind. He regarded me briefly, as one might regard a condemned man, before helping me stow my satchel. "To Ravenshade, sir?" he asked at last. "Yes," I answered, forcing a note of cheer into my voice. "Ravenshade House." At this, he made the sign of the cross, his lips tightening. Without another word, he climbed to the seat and flicked the reins, and we set off along the narrow road. The journey was silent save for the crunch of wheels upon gravel and the mournful cry of distant gulls. The air grew colder as we neared the coast, and a mist rose from the marshes that flanked the road, curling in tendrils about the cart. The driver hunched low, muttering beneath his breath, and I caught the name Helena once, spoken as though it burned his tongue. I did not ask him more. Some instinct held me silent. At length, the mists parted, and Ravenshade came into view. The village clung to the cliffs like a thing half afraid of falling. Its cottages crouched against the wind, their roofs black with years of salt. Beyond them rose the outline of Ravenshade Abbey, a ruin of shattered arches and crumbling walls that seemed to claw at the sky. And further still, upon a lonely rise, stood Ravenshade House, the estate that was to be my charge. It was larger than I had expected, though not grand. Its windows were dark, its roofline jagged, its chimneys long since cold. A path wound up the hill, bordered by yew trees whose twisted forms reached like the hands of the dead. When the cart drew up at the inn, the driver refused payment, waving away my coins with a grim shake of the head. "No charge," he muttered. "I'll not take money for bringing a man to Ravenshade." With that, he turned his horse and was gone, leaving me alone in the fading light. The inn was small, its walls thick with centuries of smoke, its hearth blazing with a fire that seemed too eager, as though defying the darkness that pressed upon it from without. The innkeeper, a stout man with a kindly manner, greeted me warmly enough, but when I gave my name and purpose, the warmth in his eyes faded. "You're bound for Ravenshade House, then?" he asked. "I am." His hand tightened upon the tankard he held. "Best keep your wits about you, sir. Strange things walk in that place." Before I could press him further, a woman entered from the kitchen. She was tall, thin, and severe of face, her hair streaked with gray, though her years seemed no great number. She looked at me with a sharpness that pricked my skin. "This is Mrs. Wren," the innkeeper said. "Housekeeper at Ravenshade. She'll see you settled." Mrs. Wren inclined her head, though her eyes never softened. "If you value your rest, sir, you will not linger after sundown. The marsh has a voice of its own, and it is not friendly." I laughed, though uneasily. "Surely you do not mean to frighten me on my first night." Her lips pressed thin. "I mean only to warn you. Ravenshade House does not welcome strangers easily, and some there are who never leave at all." That night, I lay awake in the narrow bed of the inn, the fire in the grate burning low. The wind clawed at the shutters, the sea roared against the cliffs, and in my half-sleep I thought I heard a woman's voice, low and keening, borne upon the gale. I told myself it was the wind. I clung to reason as a drowning man clings to driftwood. But reason is a fragile thing in Ravenshade. And in that first night, though I did not know it, she had already begun to watch me. The following morning, Mrs. Wren came for me at the inn, her figure framed in the doorway against a sky already gray with mist. She carried no more than a lantern and a ring of keys, yet her presence was as commanding as if she bore weapons. With few words, she bade me follow, and together we climbed the winding path that led from the village to the estate. The journey was longer than it had seemed from afar. The path wound between the marshes, where stagnant pools reflected the sky in dismal tones, and the ground squelched underfoot with every step. The yews that bordered the way loomed overhead, their branches twisted into shapes uncanny, as though each tree bore the likeness of some tormented soul. As we drew nearer, Ravenshade House revealed itself more fully. The walls were streaked with damp, the roof patched in places with tar, and many of the windows were shuttered, their glass long since broken by storms. A heavy iron gate barred the way, its bars rusted and bent. Mrs. Wren unlocked it with effort, the shriek of the hinge echoing into the mist like a cry of protest. Inside the grounds, the house loomed with a malign grandeur. It was no ruin, not yet, but it bore the look of a place abandoned by time itself. Ivy clung to its stone like veins across diseased skin, and the air about it seemed colder than the day beyond. "You will take the east wing," Mrs. Wren said as she led me through the threshold. "It is less drafty. The west wing is closed." "Closed?" I asked. Her keys jangled softly as she tightened her grip. "Some doors are better left locked." The entrance hall was vast and shadowed, the air stale with dust. A great stair rose before me, its banister carved with grotesque faces, gargoyles, and demons, whose eyes seemed to follow as I passed. Portraits lined the walls, stern ancestors gazing down with expressions of disapproval, their features half obscured by grime. The floor was of black and white marble, cracked in places, echoing hollowly beneath our steps. Mrs. Wren led me to a chamber at the far end of the east wing. It contained a narrow bed, a desk, a wardrobe, and a fireplace that had not been lit in years. She lit a small fire herself, though the flame struggled to take, and set the lantern upon the desk. "You will need more than one light," she said. "The dark here is thick, heavier than in other places. I will leave candles." I tried to smile at her superstition, but my gratitude was genuine. Even in daylight, the house seemed steeped in shadow, as though the sun itself feared to enter. Before she left, I asked her the question that had pressed upon me since the night before. "Mrs. Wren, who is Helena?" Her eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment I thought she might speak. but then her lips pressed tight, and she turned the key in the lock. "You should rest," she said. "The house listens when you speak her name." And with that, she was gone. Thung. The day I spent in a strange half-labor, half-dream. I unpacked my satchel, set my papers in order, and attempted to begin my work. The will was straightforward enough, the estate left to a distant cousin who had not yet come to claim it. My task was to take inventory of the contents and to prepare it for eventual sale. But my thoughts wandered constantly. Each creak of the timbers overhead, each sigh of wind through the chimney, seemed like the breath of something alive. The fire sputtered despite the bellows, as though unwilling to thrive. And once, as I bent over my papers, I felt distinctly the sensation of being watched. The hair at the nape of my neck prickled, and when I turned, the doorway was empty. Toward evening, I ventured into the house. My lantern cast long shadows upon the walls as I explored the corridors. Doors opened onto rooms thick with dust, parlors with sheet-draped furniture, libraries whose shelves sagged with moldering books, dining halls where long tables waited as though the household might return at any moment, yet everywhere there was the same sense of absence. Not peaceful, but oppressive. It was as though the life of the house had been drained, leaving behind only its shell. I came at last to a door at the end of a long passage. Its wood warped and its handle rusted. I tried it, but it was locked fast. As I turned to leave, I thought I heard something from within, a faint sound, like the echo of a sob. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding. For a long moment there was silence. Then came a whisper, so faint I might have imagined it. "Leave." I stumbled back, lantern shaking in my hand. The passage was empty, yet I felt the weight of a gaze upon me, cold and pitiless. I fled to my chamber, bolting the door behind me. Night came swift and merciless. The wind rose, lashing the shutters, and the sea thundered against the cliffs. The fire in my grate had burned low, the candles guttered, and the shadows thickened until the room seemed more void than substance. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, every nerve alert. The silence between gusts of wind was worse than the noise, for in those pauses I fancied I heard other sounds, a faint creak of a stair, the rustle of fabric, the soft tread of feet upon the hall, and then came the knock. It was gentle, almost polite, a single rap upon the door, followed by silence. I sat up, heart hammering. Mrs. Wren, I thought, yet why would she come at this hour? The knock came again, louder now. "Who is there?" I called, my voice unsteady. No answer. I rose, took the lantern from the desk, and approached. My hand trembled upon the latch. Slowly, I opened the door. The corridor lay before me, dark and empty. The shadows shifted with the flame, but no figure stood there. And yet, at the far end of the passage, I saw her, the woman in black. She stood motionless, her form cloaked in deepest mourning, her veil obscuring her face. The air about her seemed thicker, colder, and the flame of my lantern shrank as though suffocated. For a long moment we regarded one another. My tongue was frozen, my body rooted to the spot. Then she raised her arm and pointed, not at me, but beyond me into the chamber I had left. I turned swiftly, the lantern swinging. The room was empty. When I faced the corridor again, she was gone. Shuwei. The rest of that night passed in a torment of fear. I dared not sleep, dared not close my eyes, lest she return. The whispering of the house seemed to grow louder, until I could no longer tell which sounds were real and which were born of my own imagination. When at last the dawn broke, pale and colorless through the shutters, I found myself still seated at the desk. The lantern burned out, the fire cold, my paper scattered. My hands shook so violently I could scarcely hold the pen. It was then I knew my task at Ravenshade was no mere matter of law. I had crossed the threshold of something older, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. The woman in black had seen me, and she would not let me go. The morning after that first haunted night broke cold and gray. A thin frost glazed the window panes of my chamber, and when I touched the glass, it stung my skin. Ravenshade House seemed even more silent in the dawn, as though it had settled into a brooding stillness after the terrors of the night. The corridors, once whispering with unseen movements, now held only the brittle hush of abandonment. I resolved that I would not be overcome so easily by superstition. A solicitor, I told myself, must deal in fact and law, not whispers and phantoms. Yet, as I packed my satchel to venture down into the village, I could not shake the memory of her standing in the corridor, her veil like a shadow draped over her face, her hand lifting to point into my very room. I walked quickly down the winding path from the estate, the marsh mist curling about my boots, the yews bending like mourners in an unseen procession. The sea roared in the distance, its sound muffled by fog, and gulls circled overhead like pale scraps of paper blown on the wind. The village seemed half asleep when I arrived. The cottages hunched beneath their thatched roofs, the smoke from their chimneys rising sluggishly. The inn stood with its door ajar, warmth and firelight spilling out like an invitation. I stepped inside and was met by the comforting scent of wood smoke and baking bread. The innkeeper looked up from polishing a tankard, his expression brightening until he saw who I was. Then his cheer faltered, and he regarded me with the same mixture of pity and unease I had seen the night before. "You've gone up to the house, then?" he asked quietly. "I have, and I have spent a night there." His eyes widened. "Alone?" I nodded. Mrs. Wren saw me to my chamber, but after that, I was left to myself. At this, the innkeeper crossed himself. "God preserve you, sir. Many would not have stayed an hour." I hesitated, then lowered my voice. "Tell me, what is it that haunts that place? Who is the woman I have seen?" The innkeeper glanced toward the far corner of the room, where two fishermen sat hunched over their mugs, listening. He set down the tankard and leaned closer. "There are stories, sir. Old ones, older than my father, and his before him. Ravenshade Abbey was once a place of holy refuge, built by monks who came to tame the marsh and bring God to this forsaken coast. But the land was never right. The marsh swallowed fields, storms wrecked ships upon the rocks, and the villagers whispered that the abbey was cursed from its foundation." He paused, lowering his voice still further. "They say the monks themselves grew fearful. They built their church high, with windows like watchful eyes, and filled it with relics and charms. But no relic could keep out what walked the marsh at night." I felt the hairs at my neck rise, but I pressed him on. "And the woman? Who is she?" The fishermen shifted uneasily. One spat into the fire. The other muttered, "Best not speak of her." But the innkeeper continued, his voice grim. "Her name was Helena Harrow. a sister of the last abbot's kin, if the stories be true. She came to the abbey when her child was lost. Some say drowned in the marsh, some say taken by fever. She begged for solace, but the monks turned her away, fearing scandal. It is said she cursed them with her grief, vowing that no child in Ravenshade would be safe so long as she was denied. My blood chilled at the mention of her name, Helena, the very name I had heard upon the lips of the cart driver, muttered as though it seared him. What became of her? I asked. No one knows for certain, the innkeeper replied. Some say she wandered into the marsh and was swallowed, others that she took her own life within the abbey walls. But all agree on this. Since that time, when the woman in black is seen, a child soon dies. At this, one of the fishermen struck the table with his fist. Enough, he growled. Do not fill the stranger's head with tales. It is bad luck even to speak of her. The innkeeper fell silent, but his eyes told me enough. He believed. They all did. I left the inn unsettled, though determined still to hold to reason. Yet as I walked the narrow lanes of the village, I saw the truth of it in the villagers' faces. The children were few, and those I glimpsed were kept close by their mothers, who glanced often over their shoulders. Doors were barred even in daylight, windows shuttered though the day was dim. And whenever the abbey came into view, its broken arches black against the pale sky, people turned away as if from a wound. Shanji. That afternoon, Mrs. Wren returned to the house with supplies. She carried bread, candles, and coal for the fire, and as she arranged them in the kitchen, I confronted her. Mrs. Wren, I said, I have heard the villagers speak of Helena. They say she haunts this place, that she brings death to children. Her hand stilled upon the loaf she was slicing. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she looked at me, her eyes sharp as knives. You should not ask such questions. But you know the truth, I pressed. You live here. You must have seen her. Her gaze did not waver. I have seen many things, and I have learned that to speak of some of them is to give them strength. The less said of Helena, the better. I could not let it go. Last night she came to me. I saw her with my own eyes. The knife in her hand trembled, then clattered to the table. Her face went pale. Then God help you, she whispered. For once she has shown herself, she will not leave you be. Her words struck me harder than any blow. I longed to demand more, but she gathered her things and fled the room, leaving me alone with the echo of her fear. Dale, that night, I sat by the fire with one of the Abbey's old volumes, a ledger of names and dates, its pages crumbling with age. I traced the records with a finger, noting births, deaths, burials. Many children I saw had been recorded with short lives, their names marked with a cross before they had reached more than a handful of years. And among the margins, written in a darker hand, I found a phrase repeated, when she walks the children fall. The fire guttered suddenly low, and the room chilled. I looked up sharply, lantern in hand. At the far wall, beyond the circle of light, I thought I saw her once again. A shape, black and still, her veil blending with the shadows. I dared not breathe. But when I blinked, the corner was empty. Liang, the legends of the Abbey had sunk their claws deep into me. I could tell myself they were but stories, the inventions of fearful villagers, yet they carried the weight of truth. I could feel it in the marrow of Ravenshade House, in the cold that no fire could chase away, in the silence that pressed upon me when night fell. And though I wished to laugh at such tales, I found myself unable, for the woman in black was not merely legend to me. I had seen her, and I feared, God help me, I would see her again. The following day dawned damp and colorless, the mist lying thick upon the marshes and the sea beyond the cliffs, hidden beneath a pall of shifting fog. Ravenshade House seemed not so much to awaken with the morning as to endure it, its walls dripping with moisture, its timbers groaning softly in protest of the ceaseless damp. I had slept little, if at all. The memory of the woman's still figure, her veil swallowing the light, lingered behind my eyes whenever I closed them, yet I clung stubbornly to reason. I told myself it had been an illusion born of fatigue, a trick of the lantern's flame and my own overwrought imagination. Still, the villager's words weighed heavily upon me, as did Mrs. Wren's fear. The name Helena, once spoken, seemed to echo through every corridor of the house, filling its shadows with threat. It was then I resolved that I must see the Abbey for myself. Son, the path to Ravenshade Abbey wound from the back of the estate, through a tangle of bramble and gorse that grew thick upon the marshland. I carried a stout stick and a lantern, though the sun was not yet set, for the fog hung dense and the light dim with every step. The ground squelched beneath me, and from time to time the marsh released a hollow bubbling, as though it sighed with some buried breath. At last, through the mist, the abbey rose. Its ruins loomed stark against the gray sky, broken arches, shattered buttresses, and windows gaping like blind eyes. The stone was blackened with age and sea spray, yet traces of its former grandeur clung to it still. A great tower, half collapsed, leaned precariously as though bending toward the earth in sorrow. Ivy choked its walls, and crows circled above, their cries harsh and mocking. As I stepped within the nave, the silence of the place fell upon me like a weight. My footsteps echoed against the stone, magnified as though the ruin itself listened. Here and there, fragments of stained glass lay scattered, their colors dulled by centuries. Weeds sprouted between the flagstones, and a chill air seemed to seep from the very ground. I wandered slowly, lantern held high. The great altar lay toppled, its carvings worn to little more than vague shapes. Beside it stood a row of broken pews, where once villagers might have knelt in prayer. Now only shadows lingered. It was then that I heard it, a whisper, faint, like the stirring of leaves, yet distinct enough to freeze my heart. I turned sharply, lantern raised, but the nave lay empty. Again it came, this time nearer, threading through the arches, as though the very stones murmured. Words I could not at first distinguish, but filled with a cadence of grief. I forced myself forward, each step slow and deliberate, though my knees trembled. The whisper grew clearer, shaping itself into words not meant for my ears. They would not, they turned me away. The voice was a woman's, low and broken, the sound of sorrow calcified into rage. My hands shook so that the lantern's flame danced wildly across the walls. For a moment I glimpsed movement, no more than a shadow passing swiftly between the pillars. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The abbey answered only with silence. And I pressed on toward the choir, where a series of side chapels stood in ruin. Here the air grew colder still, my breath rising in pale plumes. I came to a doorway sealed with a heavy plank, warped with damp and fastened with rusted nails. Upon it, carved deep into the wood, was a single word, Helena. I recoiled, heart pounding. The letters were jagged, carved not with care but desperation. They seemed fresh, though the plank itself was centuries old. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the ruin, extinguishing my lantern. I was plunged into darkness, the abbey closing about me like a tomb. And then the whispers returned. Not one voice now, but many, overlapping, rising in a dreadful chorus. Leave, leave. She comes, she comes. I stumbled back, groping in the dark. My stick struck stone and I nearly fell. The voices swelled, filling the air until they seemed to press against my skull. And then, clear, distinct, and terrible, I heard her. My child, where is my child? A shadow loomed in the blackness, taller than any I had yet seen. My eyes strained, and slowly, horribly, the form of the woman in black emerged. She stood before the sealed door, her veil falling in tatters, her hands clawing at the wood as though to tear it open. Her movements were jerking, unnatural, as if her body were not her own, but driven by some force of grief too great for flesh to contain. I could not move, could not breathe. Her head turned slowly, impossibly, until her veiled face fixed upon me. The whispering ceased. The ruin fell utterly silent. And in that silence, she raised one hand, extending it toward me. I fled. How I found my way from the abbey, I cannot tell. My memory is a blur of stone and fog, of roots clawing at my feet and shadows clutching at my sleeve. When at last I burst into the open marsh, I did not stop running until the house loomed once more, its windows glimmering faintly in the dusk. Mrs. Wren found me in the hall, breathless and pale, my clothes torn with bramble. Her expression hardened at the sight of me. "You have been to the abbey," she said. I could not speak. I could only nod. She sighed, setting her lantern down with a decisive clang. "Foolish man, you think yourself strong because you are learned, because you believe in papers and laws. But there are things older than law, older than stone, and they dwell in Ravenshade still." I grasped her arm. "What is behind that door? Why is her name carved there?" She looked away. "That is her chapel, her place of grief. It was sealed to keep her within, but seals grow weak, and she grows stronger with every soul that dares to trespass." Her words sank into me like ice. I thought of her clawing hands, the door shuddering beneath her touch. "She wants her child," I whispered. Mrs. Wren met my gaze at last, her eyes bleak. "And she will not rest until she takes another in its place." Oh, that night I sat by the fire, the ledger open before me, my hands trembling too violently to write. The voices of the abbey still echoed in my skull, the woman's cry reverberating in my bones. "My child, where is my child?" The flame burned low, casting the chamber in wavering light. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting like figures in procession. I told myself it was but the play of firelight, and yet, as midnight tolled, I fancied I heard a faint scratching at the shutters. Then came a whisper, soft and near, though no lips were close enough to form it. "You will help me. You will bring him back." I pressed my hands to my ears, but still the voice threaded through my thoughts, binding me in a web from which I could not break free. The following morning broke as pale and brittle as glass, a thin sun pressing faintly through the marsh fog. I woke unrested, my limbs heavy, my mind thick with the memory of whispers that had followed me into uneasy dreams. The house itself seemed drained of warmth, even though I had kept the fire burning until the small hours. I thought then to seek respite among the living, to walk once more into the village. Perhaps, I told myself, I would be steadied by the sight of familiar human faces, by the rhythm of their daily toil. Anything to free me from the oppressive silence of Ravenshade House. Yet as I descended into the narrow lanes, I found no such comfort. The villagers were quieter than before, their gazes avoiding mine, their movements clipped and hurried. A pall seemed to hang over them, as though some ill wind had passed during the night. I entered the inn, hoping for warmth, and found only tension. The hearth burned low, and those gathered within sat in uneasy silence. The innkeeper greeted me with a curt nod, but there was no chair in it. His hands trembled as he set a mug before me. "What has happened?" I asked. "Why does the village seem so changed?" He hesitated, his jaw working as though to hold back words that wished to spill forth. At last, he leaned close, his voice a rasp. "A child, sir, little Margaret Drew. She took fever in the night. She is gone." My heart lurched. "Gone? Dead?" He nodded, his eyes dark with sorrow. "She was but 6 years old, the only child of her parents, healthy as spring only days ago." At this, a woman near the hearth crossed herself, her lips moving in silent prayer. The fishermen exchanged grim looks, and one muttered, "She has been seen again. The woman walks." A silence followed, heavy and unbroken. I forced myself to ask, though my throat was dry as ash, "When was she seen?" The innkeeper's gaze lifted to mine. "Last night, upon the road to the abbey. You went there, did you not?" The room seemed to contract around me, the villagers' eyes hard upon my face. My chest tightened, guilt pressing like a stone upon me. For had I not indeed seen her? Had I not stood frozen as her veiled face turned toward me in the ruins? But surely such tragedy could not be tied to my folly. Surely not. Still, I felt their silent accusation, and I could not remain among them. I rose abruptly, leaving the untouched mug upon the table, and fled into the cold air. Son, I found myself drawn, against all reason, to the Drew cottage at the far end of the village. A cluster of villagers stood gathered outside, their heads bowed, their faces ashen. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, uncertain if I had the right to intrude upon their grief. Through the open door I glimpsed the mother, her form bent and trembling, her wails tearing at the stillness like ragged cloth. The father stood beside her, his face carved with shock, one hand resting helplessly upon her shoulder. Upon the bed lay the small figure of a child, pale and motionless, a wreath of wildflowers placed at her head. The sight struck me to the core. Though I did not know her, I felt the loss keenly. A child's life snuffed out, sudden and inexplicable. And behind it, I could not help but see her, the woman in black, her shadow falling upon the bed, her grief poisoning all it touched. A voice murmured at my side, "You have seen her, have you not?" I turned. An old man stood there, his back bent, his eyes milky with age but sharp with knowledge. His hand, gnarled like a root, clutched at my sleeve. My words faltered. "I do not know what I saw." He shook his head. "You know, we all know. When she walks, the children fall. It has always been so. The villagers parted to let a priest through. He bore a small crucifix and muttered prayers beneath his breath, but I saw in his eyes no confidence that his words would avail against such a curse. He passed into the cottage, and the wailing rose anew. I could endure no more. I turned and stumbled away, the old man's grip slipping from my sleeve, his whisper following me like smoke. When she walks, the children fall. Kaima. The day passed in a haze. I returned to Ravenshade House, but its solitude offered no balm. Every corridor seemed to hum with a faint vibration, as though echoing with cries too faint for the ear, but heavy for the soul. I attempted to work, spreading papers across the desk, but the ink blurred upon the page. My mind returned again and again to the sight of that small, still form, the wreath of flowers framing her like a grotesque parody of innocence. By evening, I could bear my restlessness no longer. I took up my lantern and walked the grounds, the marsh mist curling about my boots. The wind carried a low moan, not quite the sea, not quite the air, but something that seemed almost human. It was then I heard it, the faint sound of a child's laughter. I froze. The sound came again, distant yet clear, a high, lilting giggle that drifted across the marsh. Impossible, I thought, in this place of grief. Yet it called to me, drawing me forward. I followed my lantern, casting a narrow beam. The laughter flitted ahead, always just beyond reach, leading me toward the old yew grove at the edge of the Abbey grounds. There, between the twisted trunks, I saw movement, a small figure darting, pale in the gloom. Margaret? The name escaped my lips before I could stop it. The figure stilled. Slowly, it turned. It was a child, no taller than my knee, her hair loose, her nightdress fluttering in the wind. But her face, oh God, her face was blurred, indistinct, as though shadow lay upon her features. She lifted one hand toward me, a gesture both beckoning and pleading. I stumbled forward, compelled beyond reason. But as I drew near, a taller shadow rose behind her. The woman in black. Her veil flowed like smoke, her form towering, enveloping the child. One skeletal hand rested upon the girl's shoulder, claiming her, owning her. The laughter ceased. The grove fell silent save for the pounding of my heart. "Let her go," I cried, though the words tore uselessly at the night. The woman's head inclined, slow and deliberate, as though mocking my command. Then, with one sweep of her arm, the child vanished into mist. The shadow turned to me. Though I could not see her eyes beneath the veil, I felt them pierce me, cold and inexorable. "You cannot save them," her voice whispered not aloud, but within the marrow of my bones. "You cannot save anyone." I stumbled back, my lantern clattering to the earth. The flame guttered and died, leaving me in darkness. When I raised my eyes again, she was gone. Only the yews loomed, their branches creaking in the wind, their shapes like bent mourners in the gloom. Malkuth. I returned to the house half mad with terror, yet beneath it all, a grim certainty settled. The legends were no superstition. The curse was real. The woman in black was no trick of the eye, but a force that moved upon the land, feeding upon grief, taking what was dearest to the living. And now she had shown herself to me not once but many times. Why me? Why had she chosen me to bear witness to her sorrow? I could not say. But as I lay sleepless in my chamber that night, listening to the hollow groans of the house, I knew this much: the woman in black had marked me, and wherever she walked, death would follow. Sleep had abandoned me utterly. I lay through the long hours, staring at the beams of the ceiling, every creak and sigh of Ravenshade House filling my mind with dread. When at last I rose, pale with exhaustion, the morning mist had thickened so that the marsh was swallowed in a white sea, and the walls of the house seemed to float, untethered, in a void. I knew I could not endure another day of ignorance. The whispers, the visions, the child's laughter that had lured me into the yews, all these pressed upon me with intolerable weight. If I was to keep my reason, I must learn the truth of Helena. I found Mrs. Wren in the kitchens, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes gazing not at the hearth but at something unseen, far away. "You knew this would happen," I said, more harshly than I intended. "You knew the child would die." Her gaze shifted slowly to mine, her face lined with sorrow. "When she walks, children fall. It is always so." "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Who is she? What does she want?" Mrs. Wren closed her eyes. For a long moment I feared she would remain silent, keeping her secrets as she had before. But at last, with a shuddering breath, she spoke. "You have heard her name, Helena. She was of this house once, not mistress, but daughter. A young woman, proud, willful, and headstrong. She fell in love with a man not of her station, a sailor. They met in secret, walking the marshes when the tide was low, and when she bore him a child, she thought she might defy her kin and live as her heart desired." Her voice faltered. She twisted her hands in her lap, but her family were stern, unforgiving. The child was deemed a disgrace, a stain upon the blood of Ravenshade. They tore it from her arms, some say cast it out upon the marsh, others that it was taken and hidden where she would never find it. Helena raged, wept, begged, but no mercy was shown. They shut her away in the abbey, in a small chapel, to repent her sin in solitude. I leaned forward, my chest tight. The sealed door, the one with her name carved upon it? Mrs. Wren's eyes flickered with dread. She nodded. Yes, there she remained. Her cries echoed through the abbey until the day they ceased. Some say she starved, others that she wasted away in grief. But when they went at last to unbar the door, they found no body, only shadows and the sound of weeping that has never stopped. Her words fell into silence. I felt cold to my marrow. And since then, Mrs. Wren's voice sank lower. "She is seen, always in black, for mourning that never ends, always near the abbey or upon the marsh. And when she is seen," her voice broke, "a child dies, not always at once, not always in the same way, but without fail. Her grief poisons them, her rage takes them. It is her curse and ours." I pressed my hands to my face. The child in the grove, Margaret's pale form, the laughter cut short suddenly. All was clear. Helena's sorrow had become something terrible, a force that spread like plague, claiming the innocent as if to avenge her own loss. "Can nothing be done?" I whispered. Mrs. Wren shook her head. "The priest blesses, the villagers pray, but it avails not. Her hunger is not for prayers, it is for her child. And so long as that child is lost, so long will she wander, and so long will others pay the price." Her eyes met mine, fierce with warning. You must leave this place, Mr. Hale, before she marks you deeper than she has already, before she takes from you what you hold dear." Her words struck me like a blow, for though I had no child, no family here, I felt in some dreadful way that the woman had indeed fixed her gaze upon me, that she had woven me into her lament. Dalton, that afternoon, restless and burdened with the weight of revelation, I took once more to the marsh. The fog clung low, muffling sound, and the salt tang of the sea bit at my lips. I walked without aim, seeking perhaps to outrun the dread within me. It was then that I came upon the old churchyard, long disused. The stones leaned crooked in the damp earth, their inscriptions worn to faint grooves. Weeds crawled over them, and crows perched upon the crosses, watching me with unblinking eyes. Drawn by impulse, I wandered among the graves. Many bore no names, their identity swallowed by time. But near the far wall I found a stone still legible, the letters stark and deep, in memory of the infant son of Helena Ravenshade, born and lost 1793. My heart stopped. So there had been a child. It had lived, however briefly, before being torn away. And here lay the cruel truth, etched in stone. No name, no date beyond the year, no tenderness, only loss. As I stared, the wind rose, sighing through the grass. The crows took flight, cawing harshly, and faint, so faint I thought at first it was imagination. I heard a low keening. I turned, and there she was. The woman in black stood at the far end of the churchyard, her veil drifting, though no wind stirred near her. She did not move, did not advance. She only stood, facing the small grave where I knelt. For a moment I thought I glimpsed her face beneath the veil, pale, hollowed, the eyes wide and wild with endless grief. And then, in a voice that shook the very air, she whispered, "My child! They stole my child!" The sound seemed to swell, rising from every stone, every blade of grass, until it became a chorus of mourning that pressed upon my ears. I staggered back, covering them with my hands, but the sound was not in the air alone. It was in my blood, my bones, my very soul. When I dared to look again, she was gone. Only the small grave remained, silent and desolate. Son, I fled back to the house, but there was no solace there. I could still hear her words echoing in my skull. I could still feel the weight of her gaze. That night, I sat once more by the fire, the ledger before me, though I could not read. The flames seemed to twist into shapes, faces, hands reaching, eyes weeping. My exhaustion pressed heavily, but I dared not close my eyes for fear of what I might see. And then, from the upper chamber, I heard it, the sound of a child crying. Soft at first, like a babe's whimper, then louder, rising to a heart-wrenching wail. I froze, every muscle taut. The house was empty save for myself and Mrs. Wren. There could be no child, and yet the cry continued, moving down the corridor, drawing nearer. At last it stopped outside my chamber door. The latch rattled. Slowly, inexorably, it began to lift. I leapt to my feet, slamming my hand against it. "No!" I cried, though my voice shook. The wail rose to a scream, piercing, inhuman. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ceased. Silence pressed in, thicker than before. I sank to my knees, trembling, my hand still against the wood, and in that silence a whisper seeped through the crack of the door. You will bring him back to me. The days that followed blurred together into a gray haze, each dawn bringing neither comfort nor reprieve, but only a deepening sense of doom. The marsh remained cloaked in fog so dense that the horizon vanished into a shapeless void. Even Ravenshade House itself seemed to dissolve at the edges, its turrets and chimneys swallowed whole until the building appeared a shadow cast against nothing. I had begun to feel that time itself was altered here, that the hours crawled, warped, stretched until a single day might as well have been a week. What little sleep I managed was fevered and broken by dreams in which Helena's voice wound endlessly through corridors without end. Me child. It soon became apparent that the villagers of Ravenshade wanted nothing more to do with me. On the third morning, I resolved to ride into the village in search of parish records, convinced that somewhere in the church archives must lie the truth of Helena's story. But when I approached the inn, where once I had found a measure of human presence, shutters banged shut at my coming. At the grocer's door, women gathered their children hastily, clutching them to their skirts as though I carried plague. At last I confronted one of the men, a fisherman I recalled from the evening of my arrival. He avoided my eyes, muttered something about the mark upon him, and hurried away. It was then I understood. By stepping into Helena's domain, by seeing her with my own eyes, I had been claimed. The villagers knew it, and in their fear, they would leave me to whatever fate awaited. I returned to the house in silence, the weight of isolation pressing heavier than the fog. Wang. That evening, I sat with Mrs. Wren in the kitchen, watching the fire lick at the iron grate. I recounted to her what I had witnessed in the churchyard, the grave, the apparition, the words she had spoken. Mrs. Wren listened with an expression carved from stone. At last she said, "Then you are bound to her now. She does not show herself twice to one she does not intend to keep." "Keep?" I repeated, chilled. Her gaze did not waver. "There are many ways the dead hold fast to the living, some by terror, some by grief, some by taking from them what they love most." I shuddered, though I could not help but ask, "And how many has she taken?" Mrs. Wren's eyes drifted to the window, where fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "Too many to count. My own brother was among them. He went into the marsh one evening when he was a boy, chasing a sound he swore was a baby's cry. We found him at dawn, face down in the mire. There was no mark upon him, no wound, yet he was gone all the same. And when I looked up from his body, she stood there, watching." Her words struck me like hammer blows. Grief and dread twisted together in my stomach until I felt I might retch. Yet some morbid impulse within me urged me on. "Then tell me, why does she linger still? If her child is buried, if all is lost, why does she remain?" Mrs. Wren's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because her sorrow is greater than death. Because the grave was not enough to silence her." Bah! That night, as I retired to my chamber, I carried her words with me like a sickness. The house groaned beneath the wind, the shutters rattled faintly, and I could not shake the impression that each sound was deliberate, purposeful steps moving through corridors, hands testing the locks. At midnight, I was startled awake by the distant tolling of a bell. I sat upright, my heart pounding, straining to hear. The abbey had long since lost its bells to ruin, yet still the sound carried, mournful and slow, as though rung for a funeral. I dressed hastily, lantern in hand, and followed the sound. The corridors of the house seemed endless, stretching and warping beneath my steps. Shadows writhed along the walls, darting just beyond the lantern's glow. At last I came to the front door. The bell tolled louder now, carried across the marsh by some unnatural current of air. I stepped outside. The fog enfolded me at once, clammy and thick, muffling all sound but the tolling. I moved as though through a dream, my feet drawn inexorably toward the source. The bell fell silent as I neared the edge of the marsh. But in its place came another sound, the thin, high laughter of a child. It floated across the reeds, bright and cruel, winding around me until I could not tell whence it came. My skin prickled, and I felt suddenly that I was not alone. I raised my lantern. Its light caught upon something there, among the reeds, half shrouded by mist. A figure, small, bent low, as though crouching. "Who's there?" I called, my voice faltering. The figure straightened. It was a child, a boy, pale and dripping with marsh water. His eyes wide and glassy. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Instead, a thin stream of water trickled from his lips, down his chin, as though he were drowning anew before me. I staggered back, horrified. The lantern shook in my hand, and then, from behind him, she emerged. The woman in black. She rose from the fog like smoke, her veil billowing though the air lay still. Her hand rested upon the child's shoulder, possessive, almost tender. Yet even from a distance, I felt the malice radiating from her. The venom of grief turned to hatred. The boy raised one arm toward me, his waterlogged hand trembling. His lips formed a word I could not hear. And then, in an instant, both child and woman dissolved into the mist, leaving nothing but reeds swaying in silence. I fled, stumbling back to the house with my lantern guttering low, my breath tearing at my throat. Taman. The following day, I could not bring myself to speak of what I had seen. Mrs. Wren regarded me with a look that seemed both pity and resignation, as though she already knew. The villagers continued to shun me, and all the while Helena's voice circled in my mind like a vulture. I tried to read, to write, to occupy myself with the affairs of law that had first brought me here. But the pages blurred, and every line of ink seemed to shift into the same words over and over. Bring him back. Bring him back. Bring him back. Wait, that evening, the storm broke. The wind howled across the marsh, driving sheets of rain against the windows until they rattled in their frames. The house quivered, its timbers straining, its chimneys groaning. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant each room was flooded with stark white light. I stood at the window, staring into the storm, and there she was again. At the edge of the marsh, visible only in the flash of lightning, the woman in black stood. Her veil streamed in the wind, her form outlined sharp against the dark. She raised one arm, pointing directly at me. The thunder cracked like the breaking of the world. I staggered back from the window, but the image remained burned into my sight. I pressed my hands to my eyes, desperate to blot her out, but when I opened them, the room was not empty. She was inside. Or in fact, I did not see her enter. I only knew she was there, in the far corner, her black form merging with the shadows. The air grew heavy, suffocating. My lantern guttered and died. Her veil shifted. Though her face was hidden, I felt her eyes upon me, drilling through flesh into bone. My knees weakened. I clutched the edge of the table, struggling to remain upright. "What do you want of me?" I whispered. Her voice slid through the dark, cold and ragged as a blade. "My child, give him back." The words throbbed in my skull, more command than plea. The air itself seemed to vibrate with them. And then she was gone. The room lay empty once more, save for myself, shaking and broken, the storm raging beyond the windows. Sleep abandoned me entirely. Even when exhaustion pressed my eyes shut, I drifted only into fevered half-dreams where the storm never ceased, where Ravenshade groaned endlessly and the cry of a child rose above the wind. When at last I surrendered to waking, it was with the grim certainty that I had reached a threshold. To remain within these walls was to be consumed piece by piece. To confront the source of this blight was the only path left. So it was that, on the morning after the storm, I resolved to cross into the marsh. Darling, the house was eerily still when I rose. No clatter of pots from Mrs. Wren, no echo of her firm tread upon the flagstones. I found her at the kitchen table, her hands folded as if in prayer, though her lips did not move. When she saw me clad for travel, boots laced, lantern and satchel at my side, she shook her head slowly. "You mean to go?" she said flatly. "I cannot remain a prisoner here," I answered. "I must see for myself where she lingers. Perhaps there is a way to put her to rest." Her mouth twisted, though in pity or bitterness I could not tell. "Do not mistake yourself, Mr. Harrow. She does not linger. She reigns. The marsh is her dominion, and you will find nothing there but despair." "All the same," I said, my voice steadier than my heart, "I must go." Mrs. Wren regarded me a long moment, and then, to my astonishment, she rose and fetched from a cupboard a small wooden cross bound with twine. "Take this then. It belonged to my mother. It will not drive her away, nothing will, but it may give her pause." I accepted it with trembling hands, feeling a shameful comfort at its weight. The marsh lay beneath a low gray sky. The storm had broken, but left its residue behind, puddles gleaming like cold mirrors, reeds bent and twisted, the very air heavy with salt and decay. Each step sank into sodden earth, the mud clutching at my boots as though eager to drag me down. I followed the narrow causeway that wound outward from Ravenshade House. Once, perhaps, it had been a road of some sort, but now it was little more than a strip of firmer ground among the mire. The fog thickened as I advanced, swallowing the horizon until all that remained was mud, water, and the occasional twisted thorn bush rising like a corpse's hand from the ooze. More than once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, soft splashes echoing my own. Each time I turned, lantern raised, I found nothing. And yet the impression lingered, that I was not merely walking into the marsh, but being drawn, guided as a fly is guided toward the web. Mine. At length, I reached the ruins of a stone wall half submerged in moss and water. Beyond it stretched a patch of ground firmer than the rest, where several crooked shapes jutted from the soil. Gravestones. I realized with a tightening of my chest that I had come to the burial ground Mrs. Wren had spoken of, the place where Helena's child lay. The markers were weather-worn and half swallowed by mud, the inscriptions barely legible. I traced the letters of one with my finger, the name too faded to discern, and then I saw it, a small mound, set apart from the others, its marker newer, the letters etched more clearly. Thomas Helena Son, born 1863, died 1864. The words blurred as I stared, my vision swimming. To see it carved in stone, proof of the story was to feel the weight of her grief pressing upon me. A life extinguished before it had begun, leaving only a mother's endless wound. Kneeling before the grave, I placed my hand upon the earth. "What do you want of me?" I whispered. "Why do you not rest? What would it take?" For a moment there was only silence. Then the ground beneath my hand grew cold, so cold it seared like fire. I snatched it back, heart hammering, and then I heard it, the sound of weeping. A woman's sobs, raw and desolate, rising from the reeds. I turned, lantern sweeping, and there she was, the woman in black. She stood not 10 yards away, her veil stirring though no wind blew. Her shoulders shook with the force of her sobs, yet as I watched, she raised her head, and through the veil I glimpsed her face, pale, gaunt, eyes hollowed by unending grief. Our gazes locked. In that instant, the sobbing ceased. Her lips parted, and a hiss of words escaped, carried not by breath, but by the air itself. "He is mine." A sound broke from the reeds, a splash, then another. Figures rose from the marsh water, pale shapes dragging themselves upright. Children, their faces gray, their eyes wide and glassy, water streaming from their hair and mouths. They moved stiffly, unnaturally, their limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. One by one they gathered around her, the drowned children of Ravenshade, their forms circling like a ghastly choir. My lantern faltered. I clutched the cross Mrs. Wren had given me, raising it high. "In God's name, leave me," I cried. For a moment, the figures halted. The woman's form wavered, her veil rippling like smoke. But then she extended one arm, pointing not at me but at the grave. The earth shuddered. A thin crack split across the mound, and from it rose the sound that froze my blood, the cry of an infant. I staggered back, stumbling into the marsh water. The children swayed as one, their mouths opening in silence. The woman lowered her hand and stepped forward, her veil stretching, lengthening, until it seemed to engulf the fog itself. I fled. Through reeds and mud I ran, slipping, splashing, falling to my knees and scrambling up again. The cries pursued me, echoing across the marsh, the infant's wail, the children's laughter, the woman's sobs, all merging into a cacophony that clung to my very bones. By the time the house loomed into view, my lantern was shattered, my hands raw, my boots sodden with mire. I staggered through the door and collapsed against the wall, my chest heaving. Mrs. Wren found me thus and helped me to my chamber. She asked no questions. Perhaps she already knew what I had seen. That night, as I lay trembling in my bed, I understood the truth. There was no escaping her. The marsh was not merely her haunt, it was her kingdom. She had marked me, and now she would draw me deeper until I too was among those pale drowned children who trailed in her shadow. The marsh had seeped into me. Even when I did not tread its sucking mud, I smelled its salt and rot, mingled with stagnant water, and I heard it in the silence of the house, that distant lap of black waves against unseen banks. No corner of Ravenshade seemed free of its touch. I knew now that her grave was not the end. The infant's cry I had heard, the grave splitting under her command, the drowned children rising around her, these were not mere hauntings but summons. She was gathering strength, and each night her presence in the house grew stronger. Doors opened of their own accord, the curtains shivered without wind, and shadows stretched longer than their sources. It was Mrs. Wren, oddly enough, who at last named the path for me. "You have walked the marsh," she said one morning, her voice brittle with fear. "Then you know she will not stop until she has taken what she wants. But the heart of it is not in the water. It is in the Abbey." That was where she turned to darkness. Her words rang in me like a tolling bell. I had glimpsed the Abbey's ruins from a distance, jagged spires rising above the mist like the teeth of a broken skull. It had always seemed a relic, a place forsaken by time. But now I felt it watching me, waiting. "If I go there," I said, "will I find the truth?" Mrs. Wren's hands tightened on the bread she was kneading until it crumbled apart. Truth, perhaps. Salvation, never. Mo Yi. I set out that afternoon. The path to the Abbey wound across a stretch of causeway more treacherous than any I had yet crossed, the mud swallowing my boots, the reeds closing in like prison bars. The sky hung low and leaden. My lantern burned weakly, its flame struggling as though the very air sought to smother it. At last the ruins emerged from the fog. The Abbey was a carcass of stone. Its great nave collapsed, its arches twisted, its towers jagged against the sky. Ivy clawed across the walls, mingling with salt crust from the marsh air, and in the silence I fancied I could hear the stones weeping. Crossing into the nave was like stepping into another world. The air grew colder, the silence absolute. Columns rose like petrified trees, and the shattered windows above still held fragments of stained glass faces of saints, fractured and warped, their eyes cast down as though unable to bear what lingered here. It was not long before I found the altar, or rather what remained of it. The stone was cracked down the center, blackened as if by fire. Upon its surface lay marked symbols carved deep, their lines jagged and uneven, yet pulsing faintly, as though inked not in stone but in something that breathed. I traced one with my finger, and a chill coursed through me. These were no sacred inscriptions, they were invocations. It came to me then, the villagers' silence, Mrs. Wren's warnings, Helena's ceaseless weeping. The Abbey had not merely been a place of worship, it had been the place of her unmaking. A sound stirred the silence. Footsteps. I spun, lantern raised. Shadows rippled along the nave, gathering in the arches. And then she was there, Helena, the woman in black, standing where the chancel met the choir, her veil trailing along the stones like smoke. "You should not have come," her voice rasped, though her lips did not move. "This is where it began. This is where it will end." I backed toward the altar, though each step felt heavier than the last. "Why do you haunt this place? What was done to you here?" Her veil shifted, and for a moment I saw her face clearly. Not the ghastly mask of rage she had shown me before, but a visage ravaged by sorrow, eyes swollen with endless tears, mouth trembling with grief. "They took him from me," she whispered. "The priests. They said he was unclean. They buried him here, not in hallowed ground, but in the marsh, cast out like refuse. And when I begged, when I fell upon my knees, they turned me away. They left me with nothing, nothing but the water and the dark." Her voice cracked. and her form flickered, stretching taller, her veil whipping about her as though in a storm. So I gave myself to the dark. I bound my sorrow to these stones, and now I take from them what they took from me, every child, every future. They will all weep as I have wept. The lantern shook in my hand. The carvings on the altar seemed to pulse brighter, threads of shadow writhing across them. I understood then. Helena had forged a covenant here, some twisted vow that chained her grief to eternity. The abbey itself was her anchor, the source of her power. Aruzha, the air thickened, pressing against my lungs. From the corners of the nave, shapes emerged, those pale children again, their eyes empty, their mouths dripping brine. They drifted forward, surrounding the altar, their faces turned toward me in silence. I clutched Mrs. Wren's cross, holding it high. "You cannot keep them," I shouted, though my voice wavered. "They are not yours." The woman in black laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They are mine because sorrow claims them, as it claimed me." The children raised their hands, pointing at me in unison. A pressure built in my skull, as though their will pressed upon my very bones. My vision blurred, my breath faltered. I felt myself sinking, not into mud or water, but into despair itself. "No!" I gasped. Staggering forward to the altar, I slammed the cross down upon the cracked stone. "If this is your anchor, then let it break." The moment the wood struck the carvings, a shock ran through the nave. The ground shuddered, dust falling in clouds from the rafters. The children screamed thin, shrill wails that pierced the air. The woman shrieked, her veil thrashing as though torn by invisible hands. For an instant I thought I had done it, that I had severed her hold. But then the carvings flared brighter, and the cross burst into splinters. A wave of force hurled me backward. Striking the stone with such violence I saw stars. Through the haze of pain I heard her voice, thunderous now, shaking the abbey itself. "You are mine. You cannot break what grief has bound. You will carry me with you until the end." Her form swelled, towering above me, the nave consumed by her shadow. I crawled backward, blood trickling from my temple, and fled into the storm of her laughter. Mozart. When I staggered from the abbey into the marsh once more, the sky was darker than before, though no sun had yet set. The fog swirled around me, thick and choking, and I knew with despair that I had not weakened her, I had only fed her fury. She had revealed her secret to me not as a warning but as a promise, and I knew with terrible certainty that she would not rest until I had given her what she desired. The walk back from the abbey felt endless. The marsh was darker than when I had left it, though evening had not yet fallen. The mist pressed close, thick as wool, carrying the stench of rot and salt. Each step was a struggle, my body bruised from the abbey's violence, my mind staggering beneath the weight of what I had learned. The house loomed at last from the fog, a black silhouette hunched against the horizon. For the first time, it did not feel like a refuge, if it ever had but a trap. Its windows, unlit, resembled sightless eyes watching my approach with hunger. When I staggered inside, Mrs. Wren rushed to me, her eyes widening at the blood crusted upon my temple. She sat me down by the hearth, pressing a cloth to my wound, though her hands trembled as she did so. "You went to the abbey," she whispered, her voice both accusation and resignation. "I had no choice," I said. "She showed me what happened there, how they cast her son into the marsh, how she bound her grief to those stones. Mrs. Wren closed her eyes, shaking her head. Then it is worse than I feared. You stirred what should have been left untouched. Now she will not cease. She will come for you more fiercely than before. Her words were not needed. I already knew. The woman's voice still echoed in my skull, promising that I was hers, that grief itself had marked me. Son, the house changed that night. I woke to the sound of knocking, slow, deliberate knocks echoing down the corridors. At first I thought it a visitor at the door, but the sound came from within, moving from wall to wall, as though something searched for me through the timber itself. I rose, lantern in hand, and stepped into the hall. The knocking ceased, replaced by the faint rustle of skirts along the floorboards. I followed the sound, every step taut with dread, until I reached the drawing room. There she stood, the woman in black framed by the tall windows, her veil brushing the carpet. Her form was sharper now, less spectral, as though the boundaries between her and this world were thinning. She did not move as I entered, nor turn her head, but her presence filled the room so completely that I felt crushed beneath it. "Why do you torment me?" I demanded, though my voice was scarcely more than a rasp. Her head turned slowly, and through the veil I saw her eyes glisten. "Because grief cannot be borne alone," she whispered. "It must be shared. It must be endless." Her hand lifted, pointing toward the window. I turned and my breath caught. Outside, in the mist, shapes gathered. Dozens of them, perhaps more. Children standing in silence, their eyes hollow, their limbs stiff. Their pale faces glowed faintly in the fog. Each one turned toward the house. A dreadful understanding seized me. She was not alone. She commanded them, the drowned children of the marsh, each one taken from their families by her curse. And now she had called them to Ravenshade. I stumbled back, clutching the lantern. The flame sputtered, nearly extinguishing. When I turned again, the room was empty, but the knocking resumed, louder, more insistent, echoing from every wall. Talford. The following day brought no respite. The house was no longer merely haunted, it was infected. Doors swung wide when no draft stirred. Footsteps paced overhead, though the rooms above were empty. Mirrors warped, my reflection stretching into ghastly proportions. My eyes blackened as though Helena already lived within me. Mrs. Wren spoke little, though I called her more than once, murmuring prayers under her breath, the words tumbling fast as if she feared to stop. At one point she clutched my sleeve and whispered, "She will not stop until you are broken. Do not let her in, Mr. Harrow. Do not let her in." But I already felt her creeping within me, a shadow gnawing at my thoughts. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw her child's grave splitting open, heard the infant's cry, felt the suffocating grief she carried. It was as though her sorrow sought a vessel and she had chosen me. So, that evening, as the light failed, I sat at the writing desk, attempting to put my thoughts to paper. Perhaps, I told myself, if I could record all that had happened, I might hold madness at bay. But my hand shook too violently, and the ink spilled across the page in blotches like black tears. A sound interrupted me, the soft patter of footsteps along the upper hall. I froze. Mrs. Wren had retired hours ago, and I was alone in the study. The footsteps paused, then resumed lighter now, almost playful. A child's steps. My blood ran cold. I crept to the stairwell, lantern raised. At the far end of the corridor, where the shadows pooled deepest, I saw him. A boy, no more than 6, standing barefoot in a nightshirt soaked through with marsh water. His eyes were wide and empty, his lips blue. "Thomas?" I whispered, though I did not know why that name escaped me. The boy tilted his head. Water trickled from his hair, dripping onto the boards. He raised one arm and pointed toward my chamber door. Then he turned and walked straight into the wall, vanishing as though he had never been. My lantern flickered violently. I rushed to the chamber, flinging the door open, and nearly collapsed. She was there, Helena, the woman in black, seated upon my bed as though she had awaited me. Her veil hung loose, and I saw her face in its entirety at last. Not monstrous, not grotesque, but sorrowful. Sorrow so vast it hollowed her into something less than human, more than human. "You cannot escape me," she murmured. "Grief is in you now. It has chosen you as I have chosen you." She reached out her hand, pale and trembling. Against my will, my body leaned toward her, drawn by that inexorable pull. For an instant, I longed to take her hand, to sink into her sorrow and let it consume me. Then the cross Mrs. Wren had given me, shattered though it was, slipped from my coat pocket, clattering to the floor. At once Helena recoiled, her form shuddering, her eyes blazing with fury. The windows burst open, the curtains whipping violently, and she vanished in a shriek that rattled the glass. I fell to my knees, chest heaving. From that night onward, I knew the truth. She was no longer content to haunt the marsh or the abbey. She was here in Ravenshade House itself. And she would not stop until I yielded to her. I scarcely slept after that night. My body ached with exhaustion, but whenever I closed my eyes, I felt her there, hovering just beyond the threshold of thought. The house breathed with her sorrow. Its timbers moaned like lamentations. Its windows wept with condensation that streaked like tears. Even the fire in the hearth seemed subdued, its flames crackling in tones of grief. Mrs. Wren lingered close, watching me as though fearful I might dissolve into mist at any moment. She spoke rarely now, but when she did, it was always in half whispers, prayers stitched into warnings. "She waits for you," she said once, her hands trembling as she folded laundry that did not need folding. "The longer you resist, the stronger she grows, and when she is strong enough, she will not ask. She will take." Her words settled into me like lead. I felt her truth each time I moved through the corridors. Shadows lengthened unnaturally when I passed. Whispers curled at the edge of hearing voices of children calling from the marsh, beckoning me to join them. The worst was the knocking. Always the knocking. It spread now to every part of the house, an endless drumming from walls, floors, ceilings, as though the entire structure had become her instrument. Sometimes it was gentle, a tapping like fingernails. Other times it thundered, rattling windows and sending crockery shivering from the shelves. I thought often of leaving, to abandon Ravenshade, to flee across the causeway and never return. But even as I imagined it, despair crushed me. I knew she would follow. Her grief was not bound to stone alone. She had chosen me. There was no escape. Halt! It was on the 3rd night after the Abbey that the descent began in earnest. I sat in the study, lantern guttering low, staring at the unfinished pages of my account. My quill hung limp in my hand. I could not write. The words blurred before me as if drowned in water. Then I heard it. A lullaby. Faint, almost tender, drifting through the floorboards. A mother's song, lilting yet heavy with sorrow. My heart clenched. It was the voice of the woman herself, and though it chilled my blood, it carried a terrible beauty that drew me from my chair. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking underfoot. The song grew louder, echoing down the hall like a thread pulling me onward. It led me to the nursery. The door stood ajar, though I had locked it days ago. Inside, the rocking chair swayed gently of its own accord, creaking in rhythm to the lullaby. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting the room in silver, and there, by the cradle, she stood. Helena. Her veil had slipped, revealing her face in full. I saw the hollow cheeks, the lips pressed tight against endless grief, the eyes shimmering with both fury and despair. Yet she looked not monstrous, but heartbreakingly human. A mother forever robbed of her child. She rocked the cradle with a skeletal hand, and within it, for one breathless moment, I saw the form of an infant, a pale, still body swaddled in rotting cloth. Then the veil of shadow closed over it, and the cradle stood empty. Her gaze lifted to mine. "You see him," she whispered. "At last, my son. They stole him from me, but now you will keep him. You will carry him, as I have carried him. My grief will be your grief." The room tightened around me. My knees buckled as though the very air bore weight. I wanted to run, to cry out, but her sorrow pressed upon me, suffocating. My chest heaved, yet no breath came. "Take him," she urged, her voice both command and plea. "Take him, and you will never be alone again." I staggered to the cradle, compelled by her will. My hands reached forward of their own accord. I felt the air shift heavy, wet, brine-scented. The swaddle stirred. A cry pierced the silence. High, sharp, agonizing, an infant's wail echoing off the walls. My blood froze. I snatched my hands back, clutching the cross fragment at my breast. "No!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "He is not mine to take." The woman shrieked. The cradle splintered, exploding into shards. The lullaby twisted into a scream that rattled the very windows. Her form stretched monstrously tall, her veil whipping about like a storm cloud. "You deny me? Then you shall suffer as I have suffered." The nursery walls shuddered, plaster raining down. The rocking chair flew across the room, striking the wall with violent force. I fled, stumbling down the corridor, her cries pursuing me like thunder. Shonk. The house became a labyrinth of terror. Shadows writhed, forming hands that clawed at my ankles. Windows shattered without cause. Doors slammed shut behind me, forcing me deeper into the house's heart. At last I collapsed in the great hall, gasping, lantern extinguished. Darkness smothered me. I could hear her approaching soft steps, deliberate, echoing through the cavernous space. Then silence. I lifted my head. She stood at the far end of the hall, framed by the grand staircase, veil billowing, though no wind stirred. The drowned children clustered around her feet, their pale eyes fixed upon me. "You are mine," she said simply. "Grief has chosen you. There is no other fate." Her hand rose, palm open, and I felt it, a pull deep within my chest, as if my very soul strained toward her. My body trembled, my heart raced. The desire to surrender surged. because to surrender meant an end to fear, to loneliness, to the endless weight of resisting. To fall into her sorrow would be to dissolve, and there was a dreadful comfort in that thought. I swayed forward. 1 step, 2. Her eyes glistened, her veil quivered. She was waiting for me, arms open, the endless sea of grief ready to engulf me. Then Mrs. Wren's voice. No! The old woman appeared at the stairwell, clutching a lantern high. Its flame blazed unnaturally bright, throwing harsh light across the hall. Helena recoiled, her veil thrashing. The drowned children shrieked, their forms flickering like dying candles. Mrs. Wren rushed to my side, seizing my arm. Fight her, Mr. Harrow. Do not give her what she wants. Her words cut through the fog in my mind. I clung to them, dragging myself back from the brink. Helena screamed, the sound tearing through the hall like thunder. She stretched tall as the rafters, her form dissolving into a storm of black mist. This is not the end, she roared. You cannot resist me forever. And with a shudder that rattled the very stones, she vanished, the children with her. Silence fell. I collapsed against the floorboards, my body racked with tremors. Mrs. Wren knelt beside me, tears streaking her face. She will not stop, she whispered, not until one of you yields. And you, Mr. Harrow, you are all she wants. Now, I knew then, with dreadful certainty, that the final confrontation loomed. Helena would not relent. Her grief was endless, and she had marked me as her vessel. One last descent awaited me into the heart of her sorrow, or into my own ruin. I had known for days that this night would come. The house had whispered it in every shuddering beam, in every restless shadow. The marsh had sung it in every swell of mist, in every sigh of unseen waters. And Helena, she had made it clear in her endless lamentations. The waiting was over. The hour of surrender or salvation had arrived. The weight of dread. Mrs. Wren busied herself with trembling hands, fussing over the hearth, though no fire would banish the cold that pressed upon us. She had aged years in mere days. Her shoulders stooped, her face hollowed, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She will come tonight, she whispered. Her voice carried the certainty of a prophecy. And when she comes, she will not seek to frighten you, Mr. Harrow. She will come to claim you. I stared into the half-dead embers, the glow pulsing faintly, like the last beats of a dying heart. I thought of leaving or fleeing across the causeway before the tide returned, but I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that there was no leaving. Helena would follow. Ravenshade was not her prison, but her hunting ground. She would find me in any corner of England, in any room I dared call safe. This cannot continue, I said. If I am to end her, it must be tonight. Mrs. Wren's eyes glistened with both pity and fear. You do not end Helena. You endure her. You bend beneath her grief, or you break. I rose, my hands shaking yet resolute. Then let me break, but I will not bow. Into the marsh. The tide had begun to retreat when I stepped onto the causeway, lantern in hand, rope slung across my shoulder, the broken fragment of the cross clutched so tightly it bit into my palm. The fog rolled low and thick, curling like smoke from the earth itself. The reeds whispered as if stirred by invisible hands. The marsh was a graveyard of echoes. Laughter drifted faintly across the water, the brittle sound of children at play, twisting swiftly into cries that curdled the blood. Every step was a descent, not merely into the marsh, but into her sorrow, her loss, her endless night. The abbey loomed ahead, a ruin against the bleeding sky. Its jagged spires clawed upward as if to drag heaven down to earth. I had not wished to see it again, yet I knew it was here the confrontation must come. For the abbey was not merely stone and shadow, it was memory given form, grief carved into the land itself. Lo, the woman appears. She was waiting. Helena stepped from the mist as though it parted for her. She was taller than I remembered, her veil trailing behind like a mourning banner. Her face, when revealed by the wind, was a hollow mask of grief. The drowned children clustered at her feet, pale and silent, their eyes reflecting the lantern's glow like cold moons. "You return to me," she said. Her voice was soft, almost tender, yet it carried a weight that pressed against my ribs. "You could not stay away. No one can." I forced my voice steady. "I return because this ends tonight." Her head tilted a slow, deliberate gesture. "Ends? You think grief ends? You think it bows to fire or to faith?" "No, Jonathan Harrell. Grief is eternal. It spreads, it binds, it consumes, and now it is you." The drowned children whispered, their voices layering into a harmony of sorrow. "Join us, join us." I raised the cross. "I will not." Her laughter was like a shattering mirror. "You already have. You dream my dreams. You breathe my sorrow. Even now you hear them, feel them, know them. You are mine." Son, the rising tide. The marsh shifted beneath me. Water rose unnaturally fast, curling around my boots, then my knees, cold and grasping. It pulled, dragged, as though unseen hands sought to drown me where I stood. The children moved closer, their small hands brushing my coat, tugging at my arms, my lantern. I staggered back, raising the light higher. "Be gone!" The lantern flared, its flame unnaturally bright for an instant. The children wailed, their forms flickering like mist in the wind. Helena recoiled slightly, her veil thrashing. Yet the water continued to rise, and the marsh growled as if alive. "You cannot fight the tide," she hissed. "It is older than you, older than all. Yield and I will give you peace." "Peace?" I spat, the cold biting my flesh. "You know nothing of peace. You are a storm that will not break." Her veil snapped violently. "Then you shall break for me." Drube, the last confrontation. The water surged to my waist, pulling me toward the abbey's broken walls. Helena's form swelled, her shadow stretching monstrous across the mist. The drowned children circled tighter, their cries merging into a single, piercing wail. I clutched the cross, raising it high, though my arm trembled. "Helena, listen to me. He is gone. Your son is gone, and no curse, no grief, no vengeance will bring him back." Her scream tore through the night, shaking the ruins. "Do not speak of him." Her face warped with fury and anguish, her eyes burning with a mother's endless loss. She surged toward me, hands like claws outstretched. I planted my feet in the rising water and shouted with all the strength left in me, "Then take me if it ends this curse." What? The choice? For a breathless instant, time stilled. The children ceased their cries, their eyes wide. Helena halted inches from me, her form trembling. Her hands hovered at my chest. fingers splayed, the touch of them cold as the grave, yet not yet claiming me. Her eyes locked on mine, and in them I saw not the specter, not the curse, but the mother, the woman undone by loss, the human buried beneath centuries of sorrow. "You would give yourself," she whispered, voice raw. "Yes," I said, "if it ends, if they are freed, if you can rest." Her lips parted as though to speak further, but no words came. Only tears, tears that shimmered like black water spilling down her hollow cheeks. Then she touched me. The light, agony, cold fire surging through every vein, every nerve. My vision filled with darkness, with water, with the cries of children drowning. I felt myself torn from my body, dragged into the abyss of her grief. But then light. The cross burned against my chest, searing brighter than the sun. Helena shrieked, her form convulsing. The drowned children cried out, but their cries were different now, not wails, but gasps of release, of breath. The light spread, flooding the marsh, flooding the abbey. Shadows dissolved, mist burned away. Helena's form shattered, her veil ripping like smoke in the wind. Her scream became a sob, her sob a whisper, her whisper a sigh. And then silence. The children were gone, the marsh stilled, and Helena, the woman in black, was no more. Aftermath. I awoke on the causeway, the tide low, dawn breaking in pale gold across the horizon. My body ached, my clothes heavy with damp, but I lived. Mrs. Wren found me there. She fell to her knees, tears streaking her face. "It is done," she whispered. "For the first time in my life, it is truly done." We returned to Ravenshade. The house was changed. The walls no longer moaned. The windows no longer wept. The silence was no longer oppressive, but natural, peaceful. It was as though the house itself had been released from its mourning. I left that day. I never returned. But I carry her with me still, the memory of Helena, the woman in black. I think of her not as the specter, not as the curse, but as the mother who lost everything and who at last found release. And sometimes, in the quiet of night, I hear the faintest sound, the laughter of children carried on the wind. Not sorrowful, not drowned, free,